All right, Shalom. First and foremost, want to give all praises unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Dash. Double honor to the elders and apostles, great millstone, and taught me this truth. And shalom to the hopeful elect scattered around the four corners of the globe that have returned to the obedience of the scriptures through the true names of Yahweh, Yahweh Shai. All right. And real quick, want to do a news update in relations to biblical prophecy, right? Because according to biblical prophecy, Babylon the Great, which is America in the Holy Scriptures, is slated to be destroyed. All right. And one of the primary, things that's going to lead to the destruction of Babylon the Great is the splitting, all right, of NATO. All right. The splitting of NATO and ultimately, you know, America's allies turning on them, all right, and contributing to the destruction. All right. And that's written throughout the scriptures. So in this video, I'm going to run through this article, which gives a pretty good summary of what's going on, a little bit of history, historical backdrop to the situation. So I'm going to read the article and I'm going to pull precepts as I go. Lord's willing, this is edifying. All right, this is voanews.com. This was published on the 10th, September 10th, 2022. It says, Turkey-Greece tensions could disrupt NATO unity, experts warn, right? And NATO, is prophesied in the scriptures as well. Revelations, the 13th chapter, goes into the rise of NATO and the EU. So matter of fact, we can go ahead and get that real quick, right? Because if you don't know what NATO is, all right, NATO is essentially it's the strongest military alliance, that the world has ever seen, which is why it's referred to as a beast, coming out of the sea, and the scriptures liken kingdoms to, certain animals. And proof of that is, Daniel, the 7th chapter, So let me just read this real quick. Revelations 13:1. It says, And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his 10 horns, 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Right. And just going into this, that beast rising up out of the sea, okay, again, it's talking about NATO and the EU. All right, with the sea representing the people. All right, and it tells you that in Revelation, the 17th chapter and the 15th verse. I'll read that real quick. It says, And he saith unto me, The waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, right, the whore being Babylon the Great, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues, right? So Babylon the Great, the whore, all right, is basically benefiting off of this power structure that is NATO and the EU. All right, America is the primary beneficiary of these alliances. All right, so let me go back to Revelation 13:1 real quick. It says, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the names of blasphemy. Right, and we know that the 7 heads represent 7 kingdoms, right? The Greeks, the Romans, the Spanish, the French, the British, Germana Major and Germana Minor, all right, and the 10 horns being, those vassal, those smaller, the lesser, vassal kingdoms under that, right? We know that this is talking about a power structure, all right, NATO and the EU. When you read the scriptures, the scriptures are a book about, the chosen seed, all right, the chosen lineage, all right, being, the nation of Israel, all right. But the scriptures are also a book that is primarily about kingdoms, all right, rulership, and the transition, of powers. That's what the scriptures are about. That's a major part of the story. You know, it's coming from a top down perspective, if you will. Yahweh, why Yahweh Shai being, you know, um, the Heavenly Father being, the King of everything. All right, but again, all power in heaven and earth was given to His Son Yahweh Shai, right, who is, King of Kings. All right, so this scriptures are coming from a top down perspective, so to speak. So it's dealing with rulerships. So let's get into this article. I don't want to get too much off track because again, this Turkey Greece situation um, is something to keep an eye on because it could potentially lead to what we know is going to ultimately happen. All right, which is the divide of NATO. All right, or basically the falling apart of NATO. All right, that is prophesied in the Holy Scriptures, and it's in Revelation 17 and 16. Let me go ahead and get this. I might as well just get this and then get into the article just to grab it. I'll read verse 15 again. It says, "And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire." Right. So the 10 horns, all right, which represent, the allies, of Babylon the Great, essentially. All right. These nations, these allies are going to turn on America. All right. And they're going to destroy America. All right. So let's go ahead and get into this article. I'm not gonna read the whole article. It's not that long, but I just want to grab some pressure points. But I'm gonna read through it quickly. It says Turkey and Greece, both NATO members, have been at loggerheads for decades over territorial and airspace claims in and over the Aegean Sea. And as the historical rivals escalate their war of words, analysts warn about the risk of current tension spilling into NATO business at a time where there is a need to focus on unity against Russia amid its invasion of Ukraine, right? And we know that the ascension of Russia, is also prophesied in the scriptures as well. All right, Gog and Magog, the bear, which is also mentioned in Revelation. Excuse me. All right, it says the latest spat began when Turkey accused its neighbor of locking onto Turkish fighter jets with its Russian-made S-300 anti-aircraft missile systems deployed on the island of Crete. And Ankara also said Greek pilots placed Turkish aircraft under a radar lock over the eastern Mediterranean during a NATO mission last month. Athens dismissed Turkish claims and accused the country of violating its airspace. All right. As both countries lodged complaints with NATO about the incidents, the deletion of a tweet by NATO Allied Land Command congratulating Turkey on its Victory Day following a démarche by Greece caused fury in Ankara. It says Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan doubled down when he spoke earlier this week at Technofest, an event dubbed as Turkey's biggest aviation and aerospace festival. Look at history. If you cross the line any further, there will be a heavy price to pay. Don't forget Izmir, he said, alluding to a defeat of occupying Greek forces in the Western city in 1922. Right. So essentially, like it says, we have a word, we have a war of words, taking place between these two nations right now. Right. The Turkish president is basically talking shit, talking that talk, you know, um, to the Greeks. All right. And both of these nations are NATO nations. right? But we're starting to see, a little bit of tension, take place, and it's only going to get worse, right? It's only going to get worse, as time goes on. Let me keep reading. It says he echoed those words earlier this week, warning Turkey could come all of a sudden one night. Alluding that the Turks, will pull up. Will actually, pull up, and start something. It says his remarks were perceived by the Greek officials as threats, suggesting Turkey could take military action against the Aegean Sea islands. Athens says it is ready to defend its sovereignty. All right. So again, the war drums um are beating. You know what I mean? The vibration of war is really beginning to, rest and settle on the planet Earth. Um, and that's all biblical prophecy. The scriptures say, the weak shall say, I'm strong. Let me grab that. Right. This is Joel, the third chapter. And let me start at verse 9. It says, proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears, and let the weak say, I am strong. Right? So there's a certain spirit of, war preparation that's taking place all over the planet Earth. And all this energy, all right, all this tension, between nations, all right, between, the US and Russia, between the US and its own allies, all these things are going to lead to a eventual war, all right, a hot war, what they call it. All right, this is not always just going to be, shit talking. All right, eventually, the Lord is going to allow actual war to take place. The scriptures say the Lord is a man of war, and the Heavenly Father, Yahweh Shema Shai, is going to use war, to issue in, the kingdom of heaven. All right, divide and conquer. The scriptures say, for nation shall, rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. All right, that is a strategy, you know. So let's go back. Um, it says Greek Foreign Minister Nikos Dendias asked NATO, European Union partners, and the United Nations to formally condemn what he described as outrageous and increasingly aggressive talks by Turkish officials and letters addressed to three international bodies, copies of which were seen by the Associated Press. In a statement sent to VOA, a State Department representative called on the two allies to resolve their differences diplomatically. Pointing to the Russian invasion in Ukraine, Washington said statements that could raise tensions between NATO allies are particularly unhelpful, adding Greece's sovereignty over the islands is not in question. Right. And yeah, it is particularly unhelpful when you consider that, Russia is basically, doing its thing in Ukraine. All right. So the last thing that really needs to be taking place is bickering. All right, is infighting. Amongst the ranks, so to speak. All right, and that's exactly what we see happening. Bickering, infighting. All right, and more times than not, if you're putting your money on something, all right, on a fight, or on a game, 9 times out of 10 you're gonna go with the team, that's united. All right, the team that's on the same page. All right, the team, that's usually distracted by controversy or fighting, infighting. All right, bickering. All right, that's usually the team that takes the L. All right, and that's exactly what's going to happen. You know, it says the Pentagon did not comment on Turkish claims that Greece locked its S-300 surface-to-air missiles onto Turkey's jets last week, but said Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin emphasized the need to reduce tensions in the Aegean Sea through constructive dialogue during his previous talks with Turkish and Greek counterparts. All right, and this is the last section that I'm going to read. There are some important points. The title of this section is "The Possibility of War." All right, and it gives a little historical backdrop. It reads, it says, deep-rooted friction brought Turkey and Greece almost to the point of war 3 times in the last 50 years. Analysts speaking to VOA said they don't see a resolution anytime soon, noting that the troubled history of bilateral relations and the tight politics in the two nations' capitals. It will take a mediator who has the skill and some leverage to be able to come up with something that these two nations can agree with, but I don't see that on the horizon. All right. Said Jim Townsend, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense on European and NATO policy. Right. It says the recent spat between Turkey and Greece takes place as NATO is focusing on displaying a united front against Russia in the face of its invasion of Ukraine. Experts are worried that if the tension escalates to the point of hostilities, Russian President Vladimir Putin can take advantage. All right. And, Turkey, if I'm not mistaken, is known, all right, historically for, playing the fence. All right. Switching sides. All right. And if this thing does escalate, you can bet your bottom dollar, that they're going to continue, to do so. All right. That they're going to side with Russia. We'll just have to see. It says whatever little cracks can appear in European Union unity, Putin can make them even larger and in fact split the rock. It not only undercuts European Union, but also can spill over into NATO councils if one or the other country uses NATO as a weapon to hurt the other, Townsend said. He warned that those cracks can be exploited by Moscow as winter approaches. Russia has already cut back on its gas exports to Europe. Right. So, that's pretty much all I wanted to read on that article. Wanted to go into this a little bit. Lord willing, this is edifying. With that, I'll say shalom.